This production and Phase 1 of the Witnesses to the Holocaust Project is made possible by a major grant from the William T. Kemper Foundation. Additional generous support was provided by the David Woods Kemper Memorial Foundation and the Oppenstein Brothers Foundation.
So when I went into Buchenwald, I had never heard of the Holocaust. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what to expect. And so when I saw these people in striped uniforms, some of whom had the Star of David on them, it was then I realized that for the most part they were Jewish people.
I was a child going to school, enjoy it, having family, having parents, which was a thrill. They guide me in the right place, which I appreciated today, which means to me a lot, but didn't last too long. Hitler came to power and took away everything, and I am here in telling you the truth.
The people you're about to see were your age when the Holocaust happened, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger. They share their experience with you for two reasons. One is so you will never have to experience the pain they did. The second is so you will never ever cause such pain or allow it to happen again. To get a sense of how the Holocaust happened, let's go back to 1918. After 4 long years of bloody warfare, Adolf Hitler, an army corporal, could finally smell victory. But the weary French and the British bucked up their defenses. A fresh young American army joined the battle, and by the fall, the Germans had lost not just the battle, but the war. World War I was over. Although the Jews who lived in Germany had fought and died in the German army in numbers relatively greater than their fellow Germans, Hitler stereotyped the Jews as cowards and traitors. He looked for a scapegoat to avoid responsibility for his own failure and that of his country. And as a scapegoat, he and his followers, the Nazis, chose what was then Germany's most visible and vulnerable minority, the Jews.
It hurt me as a child so terribly how my non-Jewish friends immediately were told that they couldn't play with me, they couldn't call me, and how they turned against me.
My father was told that he had to be let go because of Hitler's and the government's requirements that companies need to get rid of their Jews. So I still have the letter that tells him that they're very sorry, but because of that, they needed to let him go. I have the feeling that probably he was the only Jew in a management position at that time.
In America, we may not always honor our commitment to equality, but Hitler dreamed of a nation dedicated to inequality. A nation restricted only to members of a so-called master race, the Aryan race, his pure-blooded Germans. No Jews or other non-Aryans need apply. Those Germans who practiced the Jewish faith were in Hitler's eyes not Germans at all. Practicing Christians who had just one Jewish grandparent could not be one of his Germans either.
There was a law that all Jewish institutions and schools had to be dissolved. And we were not allowed to go to school, naturally, to go to school anymore. My parents or anybody else was also not allowed to tutor us or give any private lessons.
They stopped Gentiles from going into Jewish homes and placed soldiers in front of our house. And I was coming home, and there was a neighborhood boy with whom I had grown up standing in front of our door in uniform. And acted as if he didn't know me.
I remember my father had to go and turn in all electrical appliances. You weren't allowed to have a radio, an iron. You weren't allowed to have animals. I remember we had a bird and we had to get rid of the bird. And dog weren't allowed to have anything.
Jews couldn't have a telephone. They could not have a telephone anymore. The Jewish butcher, his store was closed. He couldn't work anymore. The Christian butchers wouldn't sell meat to Jews. The barbers wouldn't cut the hair of the Jews. It was a situation that was, can't describe it, that it's so inhuman.
These weren't Jews who came from Jerusalem to take away Berlin or the German people. These were Jewish people who lived there for generations.
The people of Germany knew about Hitler's intolerance toward non-Aryans. Some shared his feelings, others chose not to protest or even to see. After all, society was in upheaval and the economy was falling apart. Hitler promised a brighter future. Why look too closely? In each election, more and more people voted for his party, the Nazis. In 1933, they elected the Nazis to power, and Hitler was named chancellor by the German legislature. Although democratically elected, Hitler absorbed more and more power, becoming a dictator, the Führer, able to do officially to the Jews what had been done before just randomly, a persecution that would lead in 1938 to the most terrifying night German Jews had yet to see, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass.
And I remember the Kristallnacht, very important. We were going to school. I call it, actually Kristallnacht, I call it the beginning of the Holocaust, because we saw on the streets the Jewish stores looted, the books burned, the plate glass windows broken in, signs stamped Jews, killed the Jews. We got to the school and our principal said, kids, go home, something terrible is happening.
They destroyed all the synagogues, most of them I would say, and they busted the apartments in the houses where Jewish people lived and threw the stuff out on the street. Aunt of mine, they dumped the refrigerators and everything from the third floor down to the street. They had knives in their hand and cut every picture on the wall to pieces. They acted like animals and not like human beings.
No one tried to stop Hitler when he seized Austria, the Rhineland, and Czechoslovakia. No one was able to stop him when he attacked Poland.
We were very close to the German border where I lived, so it didn't take too long for the German army to occupy Waldbröm, my little town. They came in on Monday morning. Hundreds of tanks came through our city, and they occupied our town. And about Wednesday, the Gestapo moved in and set up shop. And of course, they announced that all males 14 years and up must report at the square. Nobody knew for what reason, and of course, anybody that wouldn't would be shot.
So I was actually on the balcony of my grandfather's house when the Nazis marched in, and watched the whole scene. There were early patrols that came in on motorcycles with sidecars. They made rounds of the cities. They made sure that there was no one there that could obstruct them. And then the tanks came right through, and then they established a police force in the city.
In late in '39, my mother sent me to get something from the grocery store, get some sugar and buy some butter. And 6 SS men stopped me, and they kicked me and they told me to get on a truck. And I was arrested, and I never came back home.
By 1940, when the Germans attacked Belgium, Holland, and France, Norway, and Denmark, Hitler was too strong to stop. In conquered Poland, meanwhile, the Nazis prepared a new huge concentration camp called Auschwitz. Now, without opposition, Hitler shifted his plans from harassing and isolating the Jews in Germany to murdering all the Jews of Europe. This is genocide, the killing of an entire people. No one, neither the Jews nor the rest of the world, could foresee that Hitler would attempt genocide, but attempt it he did.
One night, we went to sleep. We lived in one room with 4 children. And one night we went to sleep. And 4 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock on the door. And 2 Germans came in and told my father, get up. And he got up and he walked only to the doorstep. And they gave him 6 bullets in his mouth. And they left. He was laying right in front of the apartment. And they walked off about 10 feet. And they came back. They thought he's still alive. And they gave him another bullet.
On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, Americans sat glued to their radios, listening to reports of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, an attack that thrust America into the war against Japan and Germany. A day of infamy, President Roosevelt called December 7th, but the president didn't know the half of it. For on that very same day, the Nazis were deporting the first 100 Jews east, supposedly to find new homes and work, but in reality to be gassed and murdered. Few survived to report the truth, and the truth was so shocking, almost no one would believe it. Out of ignorance or indifference, many nations, including the United States, turned their backs on the Jews. Unfortunately, so did many individuals.
Polish people and the Ukrainians, we were still in our apartment. They were fighting over our furniture. Who's going to take the furniture? You can laugh, that's how it happened. We were sitting, my father looked at me and laughing. They're fighting on our furniture. One guy says, I was here first. Mr. Nussbaum, wasn't I here first?
The Germans had a rule. They paid money for every Jew that you told them about. Something, I forgot, the equivalent of $125 a person.
To be fair, the cost of caring was high. In a world totally controlled by the Nazis, it took a strong sense of justice and a great deal of courage for non-Jews to do the right thing, but many still did.
There was a lot of people hide on farms in that particular area. I don't know. They want to get rid of you. Everything they had to do is contact the police, the Polish police. There's Jews on my farm. They didn't say, I keep it. There are Jews. And when the Polish police contacted Gestapo and they all come in a crowd of 10 to look for the Jews, he had them out from that bunker. And he said, I'm holding them for you because they come in to rob me. So he was free. Then, otherwise, if they find him, he's as guilty as the Jew. They kill him and they kill the Jews.
I bow my head for the Danish people. They were smuggling Jews from Denmark to Sweden on the Baltic. You're familiar with the Baltic Sea? The Baltic is never calm. The Baltic is very stormy. That's what I call Christians. Those are Christians.
For the Jews of Europe, physical resistance was all but impossible. The mere possession of a weapon was punishable by immediate death. An attack on a single German officer would often lead to the murder of the hundreds or even thousands of Jews in revenge. Still, despite the risk, people continued to resist, even if just in spirit.
People have asked me, you said, couldn't you run away? Couldn't you do something to help yourself? You were looking with the type of food that they gave you to survive. Survival was the thing. But how can you run away when you got 3 strikes against you? First, you got a uniform that is striped, that none of the Germans have seen before, and we were already inside of Germany. The second thing, you had a number on your arm. And the third thing was they cut out a 2-inch strip from the top of our hair, what I called a reverse mohawk. Instead of having hair growing up, they were just cutting them out the middle.
My mother would talk to me. All the talk was in a whisper because we could not take the chance of being heard. She would talk to me. She would, being that I was the youngest and I didn't have much education yet, she would tell me about the Jewish history and heritage. And she wanted to be sure that I know who I am and who my people are. And she tried to instill in me the pride of being Jewish.
And I'll never forget this in my life, were like 2 girls carrying their little, stools to the hanging. And we had to watch this. I remember when my mother was turning her head, the SS woman, when she was going around, she slapped her face that you had to watch it. And while those girls were hanging, in the last breath, they were crying to us not to forget and take revenge. And those words, those shrieks of those girls, I'll never forget in my life. And that's the reason, like I say, it gives me strength to my duty to tell about it.
I wasn't such a good girl to go to the slaughter. We used to call it, we don't need to go to the slaughter by ourselves. If the good Lord wants to take us, he must take us. And maybe I also have a good philosophy. I'm a strong believer. I always believed that God is going to save me.
In June of 1944, D-Day, the Americans invaded Europe, and they and their allies advanced towards Germany. But so blinded were the Nazis by racism that they continued to use many of their troops and trains not for war with the enemy, but for the murder of their own people, Jews, Gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, artists, and other political, social, and religious groups they deemed inferior.
When they took us to the train station, and I saw they putting us in those cattle trains, I said, it is a disaster.
They had all the boxcars lined up, huge, I don't know how many, but 10 or 20 of them.
And they put in 150 people in one of those wagons. And people, it was hot and people was dying.
If the boxcar could hold 100 of them, there was 150 of us in there. If they held more, there were more. They pushed in all they could. And the last ones they went in, they were hit over the head or whatever to get them in to be able to close the doors.
And there were little children and old people. For 3 days and 3 nights, the train went like that, back and forth, and back and forth.
And we was for 4 days on the train, nothing to eat. We started to get wild. We knocked on the doors. We needed to go.
There was little just slits on the train, on the cars, crowded, no sanitary equipment. I mean, this was it. You had to do everything in this car. You couldn't breathe. You were choking. It was no food. It was
so inhuman. It was so horrible. I thought this is it. I mean, we will never make it. And they didn't give you nothing to eat. They didn't give you nothing to drink. People were defecating. People were vomiting. People were dying.
We were on the train for 11 days without any food.
My mother, God, she was trying so hard to keep saying it will be okay, not to worry. My father praying, always praying. No one was listening.
By the time we got to Sandposten, which was my next camp, I'd say that probably 60% or more of the people were dead.
But Bergen-Belsen, we came by 4,000 girls and left us for 68 girls.
And finally we arrived to Auschwitz. When we arrived to Auschwitz, there was that assessment with the big gun.
We saw a sign, said Auschwitz, and you didn't know what was happening. It was just German shepherds, dogs all over, lined up screaming, "Come, fast, fast. Raus, raus."
Raus, 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 raus.
That means get out, get out, get out.
To the right and to the left, and to the right and to the left.
Left, right. Gesund, krank. Gesund, healthy, sick. Healthy, sick.
The right went to the barracks, and the left went to the crematorium.
Some guys complain, they say they get sick. They go to a hospital or something. I didn't know when they say sick, they go straight to the chimney.
And if you didn't walk this real fast, he took that gun and hit you. And if you didn't move faster, he took the gun and just shot you right in front of everybody's eyes. My cousin who was visiting Shari, who couldn't go back, she was tall and she was on the end in the front, holding my hand, and my little brother was holding my hand. My mother, and my sister suddenly just knew we were caught like this. We were thrown one side, we were thrown another side. Last time I saw my mom and my sister and my brother.
We saw the fire very, very high, sky high. They burned all the people.
They put us in a big room, and there were 2 SS women with the dead heads, you know, on the head what they had. And they were holding our hand like this. One held their hand like this, and one went with a needle and put on a number. And I said, "Why are you putting a number on my hand? I didn't do nothing wrong." And she took her hand and she slapped me on both sides of my face. And she said, "If you don't shut up, I'm going to put it all over your head."
They stripped us from all the clothes, from everything. They shaved us everywhere. They gave me, which I never forget, a brown dress with one sleeve. And no hair, no nothing, wooden shoes.
We just looked at each other. We just couldn't even recognize each other, who was friends or cousins standing next to me.
We used to bite our lips so our lips would look red. We would bite them. And we would pinch the cheeks so they would be looking red, so we wouldn't look sick to them. If we looked sick, they take you right away to the crematorium.
It was a barrack like all the other than in the camp, with a bunk bed, 3 high, 5 width. You slept 3 in a bunk. And the bunks, you know, are like our bunk big for kids here. Of course, we were slim, but still 3, you know, we were like sardines, head to feet. But it had one good thing, at least we kept each other's warm because we had one blanket, and you were not supposed to sleep with your clothes on. And they enforced the law. If they caught you with your dress on, you could have your underwear, which was minimal anyway. But you got a beating.
You know, one time what I remember, they have the German shepherds, you know, the big dogs. They give the dog eat soup, a big thing to eat. He left, and I finished this. So, this helped me so much. I said, this dog's food. So hungry, I finished the soup from the dog left.
In April of 1945, British and American troops finally reached the concentration camps, and no one was prepared for what they saw.
So when I went into Buchenwald, I had never heard of the Holocaust. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what to expect. And so when I saw these people in striped uniforms, some of whom had the Star of David on them, it was then I realized that for the most part they were Jewish people.
Their faces were gaunt, like skulls, really, and the words that came out were mumbled, and they just didn't know what to do or what was going on, and just waiting for someone to take care of them.
There were very few of them who were physically able to be up around the grounds and walking. Few of them were able actually to stand and walk. It was those individuals with whom we tried to communicate, but for the most part, the internees were in the barracks pretty well on those, what I call those shelves, where they were assigned about 3 feet of space, 3 foot by 6 foot space, and that was where they generally laid and existed.
I saw the incinerators with parts of the bodies that hadn't burned completely. I saw the stacks of human bodies stacked outside the incinerator, ready to be put in there, and I saw wagon loads of bodies ready to be burned in there. One of the sites I saw, that it was a horrible place. The odor and the smell was just horrendous.
And when we saw all these bodies everywhere, on the grounds and in the boxcars, and then again inside the buildings themselves, why, everybody was pretty much the same. The American soldiers were really shocked at what they saw, and most of us, I think, had heard about them, but we didn't have any idea that they were like they were, you know.
Hitler refused to accept any responsibility for the Holocaust or even the war itself. He would always look for a scapegoat, and in a speech on April 29, 1945, he blamed the Jews for starting this war too. The next day, Hitler committed suicide. "This is the pride of the survivor," wrote one who did survive. "Hitler is dead, and I am alive." A week after Hitler's death, the German armies surrendered. There was much joy throughout the world, but for those who had been murdered at Nazi hands, 250,000 gypsies, thousands of homosexuals, mentally retarded and sickly Germans, as many as 3 million Russian POWs, 1 million or more communists, clergy, people of influence, resistors, and unfortunate souls from all over conquered Europe, and 6 million Jews, 2/3 of all the Jews in Europe. Surrender had come too late. Of those murdered, 1.5 million were children. This was the ultimate end of Nazi terror. After the war, many of those who did survive managed to leave Europe and come to America.
We arrived at the harbor of New York City, and George and I were the last people to get off the ship. And my family and my husband's family thought we probably didn't make it because everyone else came down but us. But we were standing at the railing looking at the Statue of Liberty. We were free.
Coming into the harbor of New York, I was looking down from the ship, and I saw a mass of people, several thousand people, who came to the harbor to greet returning soldiers from the war. And they had made big signs, "Welcome Joe, welcome Bill, you know, we love you," something like that. And I was on this huge ship, and I looked down, and all of a sudden, I realized that there was no one waiting for me.
In America, they would renew their lives and rebuild their families. But they would never forget how hard we must work to protect the freedoms we have, to protect others who do not have those freedoms, and most of all, to prevent ourselves from ever denying freedom and justice to others.
For many years, I was very, very happy because I felt I came to the United States. Many people had a hand in helping me rebuild my life. They were helpful, they were kind, they were generous. And so I lived in a world where I felt that things have changed. The world has learned from the Holocaust that this would never happen again. And then I had the shock of the real world, that we haven't learned anything, that the murders, the killing, the torture continue. They may be happening to other people, but they continue. And the suffering is our suffering because we, the survivors, understand what it is to be hungry, what it is to be torn away from your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, what it is to lose everyone and find yourself alone in the world. We know, we understand, we have great understanding for the victims of today. And their suffering becomes our suffering.
The Holocaust, Through Our Own Eyes, is a presentation of the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education.